Hi guys, welcome back. If you don't know me, I'm Anna Yudin. I'm a fiction author. My debut novel, The Curse in Their Veins, came out last September, and so I feel like I have a lot of spooky books on my bookshelf because that's very much my brand. And I thought, why not make an entire video on spooky book recommendations, fall book recommendations, things to read in the September, October time of year. Now, I don't think I have all of my books here yet. I'm still waiting on some of them because they're with family because I moved recently. So I will be kicking myself if I miss certain books, but I think I have most of them and this is going to be as comprehensive as it can be. So let's get started. Starting off with the water spirit themed books. I have quite a few water spirit books. And actually there's going to be an extra one, hopefully soon. My novel, A Song at Dead Man's Cove, I'm just waiting on a literary agent to hear whether she wants to take me on or not. And if she says no, I'm just going to self-publish it. If she says yes, I'm assuming it may be traditionally published, knock on wood. That one definitely has water spirit mythology. That one is based on the legend of the Rusalka in Russian folklore, women who died near a body of water and come back to seek vengeance. It takes place in coastal Washington, and it includes a Victorian timeline and a modern day timeline. It's spicy, it's heartbreaking, it's about grief and trauma. I think you guys will really like it. It's one of my favorite books that I've written for sure, but it's not out yet, so I'll let you know when it is. Now, as for the existing water spirit mythology books, starting off with Cicadas Sing of Summer Graves by Quinn Connor, which is the name of two co-authors. This one takes place in the South near a lake that has a tragic history. Let's just say there's something underneath the lake that wants to come back and haunt the living. If you like a muggy Southern Gothic atmosphere, then you might enjoy it. Personally, it wasn't my favorite book, and I'm not a big fan of co-authoring. I thought in some ways it was difficult to kind of visualize what happened in the novel, but if it interests you, I would definitely check it out. Up next, we have Daughters of the Lake by Wendy Webb. This one I read when I was looking for comp titles for A Song at Dead Man's Cove, and I was struck by how many similarities there were between the novel that I wrote and this one. This one takes place in, I think, Lake Superior, so more of a Midwestern vibe. A body washes up on shore, but she looks like she's from a different time period, and as you can imagine, the modern day storyline has to uncover the older storyline, as often happens in Gothic novels. Another one that I'm realizing now I don't have is Dead of November. This one is actually, I'm pretty sure, written by an indie author, and I don't know how exactly I came across it, but I would really strongly recommend it, especially if you want to support indie authors. It's really well written. It also takes place in Lake Superior, has a very wintry Midwestern vibe, also incorporates some indigenous folklore, and is just very vividly, beautifully written. It doesn't read like amateurish writing at all. They Drown Our Daughters by Katrina Monroe. This is about a woman who moves to coastal Washington with her daughter in the wake of her divorce with her wife, and she uncovers a curse that's been running through her family bloodline to do with the lighthouse and to do with girls in their family being drawn out to sea. I'm gonna be honest with you, I did not love this one. I thought that there were just too many POVs, too many timelines to keep track of, and it was really not as vivid and atmospheric as it was promised to me, but it has a beautiful cover, one of the most beautiful I've ever seen, and if you like what you're hearing, definitely check it out. The Mermaid of Black Conch by Monique Ruffey. This one takes place in the Caribbean. It's about a fisherman who comes across a mermaid in the water. It's kind of a forbidden love story. It's more of a magical realism rather than horror or gothic, but it does tug on your heartstrings, and I feel like it got better and better the more I read on. And it's also a quick read, so check it out. And then there's All the Murmuring Bones by A.G. Slatter. This one is Gothic horror. There's a lot of different types of folklore, several of them related to water spirits, but the big one that it's about is about sirens. It's a little bit atmospheric. I was honestly expecting a lot more based on all the glowing endorsements that I saw. I found it to be a little bit disappointing, especially because I was expecting maybe a British setting encapsulating the folklore that originates a lot of it from the British Isles. And so I was a little bit disappointed to find out that it actually takes place in a fantastical world rather than the real world. But again, might be a good read if you are looking for water spirit mythology books. Up next, we have a bunch of vampire related books. Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice is a classic. I believe it's from the 70s. It's kind of a Southern Gothic, takes place in Louisiana and then moves to France in the 1700s. I did not really enjoy it because I don't like the format of somebody just speaking about their experience, just like an entire book of dialogue. That's not the type of book that I enjoy reading. But if you're looking for vampire books, this is a classic. It's good to have read it. Opium and Absinthe by Lydia Kang. This is not technically a vampire book, but it hints at vampires. It's more of a historical fiction and in the end not as fantastical as it makes it seem, but just because it has the ambiance of hinting at something fantastical, I feel like that makes it a really enjoyable read this time of year. I did find the narrator to be a little bit obnoxious and juvenile, but to me that doesn't really stop me from enjoying the book. And again, one of the most beautiful book covers that I've ever seen. This one I read when I was a teenager, so I'm not going to spend too much talking about it. Marked by PC Cast and Kristen Cast. I don't remember much about it except that I thought it was similar to Twilight, and at the time I really enjoyed it, so I'll just leave it at that. It's definitely YA. I don't like to read YA anymore, but I figured I could always use an extra vampire book on my vampire bookshelf. A Diary of Blood by S.T. Gibson. Definitely the best vampire book that I've ever read. This was the first book that I read this year, and it was the first 5-star read of this year. It starts in the medieval era, involves Dracula and one of his brides, and then sort of narrates how she came to unalive Dracula and why she did so, and sort of the controlling, abusive dynamics of their relationship. Really beautifully written. I wouldn't say it's like very descriptive, but yet S.T. Gibson has a way with words that just, even with like one sentence, is able to plant you into the setting. This is also extremely spicy. Up next, The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. This one takes place kind of all over Europe. It's about, if I can remember correctly, a daughter and her father seeking these historical answers on their quest to kind of uncover Dracula, and spoiler alert, in the end they do uncover him, though it's a little bit anticlimactic. It's very long and very vividly, beautifully written. Elizabeth Kostova is definitely one of my favorite authors because I love that kind of lush, vivid description. If you want to know every little detail about what they're having at tea one day in Venice and then one day in Rome, then you're gonna like it. But if you hate those superfluous details, then might not be your cup of tea. I read for the journey, not the destination. It wouldn't be complete without Dracula by Bram Stoker. I've read Dracula a few times, most of them when I was in college, I believe, and then one year I was stuck on a low-cost overseas flight with nothing. I didn't have a TV, I didn't have pretty much anything to occupy myself with except my Kindle, which had Dracula on it. And that was what revived my love in reading. And so I'm so grateful for that low-cost flight because I don't think I would be where I am today if it weren't for it. Now, some people don't like Dracula. Some people think it's too old-timey or not really up to the standards of what would publish today. I disagree. I really love it. Even though there are some things that I don't agree with in it, like the purity overtones, the xenophobic fear-mongering towards Eastern Europeans, as a Romanian person myself, you gotta kind of take it with a grain of salt, but you also gotta read it if you love vampire books. Up next we have Dracul by Dacre Stoker, which is I think Bram Stoker's nephew or something, and J.D. Barker. J.D. Barker came into some hot waters this past year with some of the things he was asking book talkers to do, and honestly I wasn't surprised because this book was not it. It was supposed to be, I think, either a prequel or a sequel to Dracula, and it fucking sucked, to tell you the truth. Then there's An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson, which is kind of a dark academia, more modern book that includes vampires. It includes this like academic rivals to lovers, love story, sapphic romance. It wasn't perfect, it did do some telling rather than showing, which isn't like a deal breaker for me. I would have liked for it to be more descriptive. I thought that the setting being modern and in school was a little bit juvenile, but this made me feel like I was back to school, like late August, early September, fall, new year, new me type of feeling. So if that is what you're looking for, I would really recommend this one. A Long Time Dead by Samara Breger. This one is also a sapphic vampire romance. I did not like it. I thought some of the writing was beautiful. I think her prose in some ways was very descriptive and vivid. However, in other ways, I did find it to be overdone. Like I'm a person that loves adjectives in my writing. I fucking love them. But sometimes in here, I was like, if we could have cut out half of these adjectives, I feel like that would have made the prose stronger and more concise. Like the very first sentence. Poppy was well rested and warm, which meant something was wrong. Neither state was easily acquired in London's limpid early spring, the lengthening foggy days offering up exhaustion and cold in clammy handfuls. So we have limpid, early, lengthening, foggy, cold, clammy. You know, like that's a lot of adjectives for one sentence. Also, this had a lot of spice in ways that I didn't feel contributed to the story whatsoever. I think it was too long. I don't think that the stakes were really high enough, and it was a little bit anticlimactic. This notion of like the older vampire who's coming back to hurt the younger vampire is, I just think, a little bit overdone. So I'm not sure I would recommend it. But again, if you're liking what you're hearing about it, check it out and decide for yourself, because reading is extremely subjective. And then the last one that I have on my vampire bookshelf that I haven't read yet, this is actually next on my TBR, is The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. I have high hopes for this one. I'm a little intimidated by how long it seems, but people say they enjoy it, so I'm really looking forward to it. I'm not sure what it's about. I think it has witches and vampires, but don't quote me on that. Witch books. These are not even all of them. Obviously, when we're talking about witch books, I gotta talk about my debut novel, The Curse in Their Veins. This takes place in a small town in Romania, and it follows two sisters who realize that there's a curse in their family bloodline and also realize that they are witches. I would describe my writing as hopefully atmospheric, vivid. That's a lot of the feedback that I get as well, that people can really visualize the scenes. They really feel like they're in them. It's basically about the intergenerational transmission of trauma and female empowerment. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, check it out. Wayward by Amelia Hart. This was maybe the best book about witches that I've read this year. I gave it 4 stars instead of 5, but I feel like maybe that's a little bit too stringent. The only reason I gave it 4 stars is because it has 3 different POVs, and I felt that it was kind of hard to sometimes track all of them in the beginning and kind of slow paced because we had to track all 3 of them. But other than that, beautifully written, a lot of like magical garden imagery. It's also about female empowerment, about overcoming abuse. Really well written. Like, you can tell this has been edited to perfection, so strongly recommend. The Witch and the Tsar by Olesya Salnikova-Gilmore is, I think, the most underrated book about witches. It's a retelling of the Russian legend of Baba Yaga, and also takes place during the Middle Ages when stuff was going on politically with the Tsar. Lushly written, poetic, lyrical, beautiful. If that's what you're trying to read and you want to learn a little bit about Russian history and folklore in the process, definitely check this out. Now, these 2 I haven't read yet, so I'm not sure what they're about. I'm assuming witches. The Witch of Willow Hall and A Lullaby for Witches. Check them out. There's also one that I know is not here yet because it honestly was not a priority for me to bring here, and that's The Unfortunate Consequences of Heartbreak. The Unfortunate Side Effects of Heartbreak and Magic, I think, by Brianne Randall. It's interesting. That book has a lot of similarities with my book that came out, and they came out like within the same week last September. That one also has a family curse and siblings and what I would describe as purple prose. I didn't love it because I found the protagonist to be extremely obnoxious, and in a way where like it wasn't self-aware, like it wasn't really something that was worked on in the novel. I didn't find the romantic plot to be very romantic. I thought it was gross. And there were certain things related to the line writing process that I thought was overdone, like a lot of metaphors that I did not love. But it's been marketed as Gilmore Girls meets practical magic, so if that is the kind of vibe that you're going for, it might be a good read for this time of year. Up next, The Honey Witch by Sydney J. Shields. This one's about a witch who lives in a cottage, and her magic has to do with honey. I expected it to be more vivid and descriptive than it was. The writing was a little bit too bare bones for me. I like a read that's a little bit more challenging with words that I have to look up and learn. But if you're looking for like a light, magical, late summer read, this could definitely be it for you. It's also a sapphic romance, kind of historical, but also takes place in like a fantastical world. And so I found that to be a little bit off-putting because it didn't feel historical to me at all. It felt like something that would be very out of place in today's world or in our real world. It also tried to be a little bit spicy. I don't think it did a really good job at that. Honestly, I didn't love this one. It was a little bit disappointing, but it could definitely be for somebody else. We gotta talk about the queen of witchlit, Alice Hoffman. Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. If you've seen the movie, the book is equally atmospheric, equally vivid and descriptive. It kind of like hops around in its POV. It has very long chapters. It sometimes tells rather than shows. And yet, despite all of this, it is one of the most important pieces of witchlit in our modern times. And that just goes to show you, you can definitely break the rules and do it well and do it in a way where it becomes a cult classic. I personally love this book, but then one that I love even more is Magic Lessons by Alice Hoffman, which goes back to the originator of the curse, of the family curse, because, witch books do often have curses in them. And this is more historical, and I found this one to be a lot more moving, honestly. I prefer this one over Practical Magic. Then we have the All Souls trilogy by Deborah Harkness. I've read the first and second, A Discovery of Witches and Shadow of Night. I loved A Discovery of Witches because it was really purple prose, really beautifully written. It is one of those books that, again, 500 pages because it'll really take the time to place you in the setting. In terms of its tropes, it's kind of like Harry Potter meets Twilight. There are vampires, there are witches, there are demons. I didn't care too much about the plot. I'm just gonna be for real. I kind of skipped over the plot. I just wanted to absorb the beautiful writing. I didn't feel as positively about the second book. Again, it felt like there was more dialogue, more characters. It felt like he was kind of chugging along. Like I didn't really feel invested in the plot whatsoever. I didn't feel like the stakes were too high in that we kept forgetting what the point of the plot was. But it was still beautifully written. So, if you like fantastical world building, then this is a trilogy I would recommend. Highland Witch by Susan Fletcher. I believe this one's written in second person, and it's about a Scottish witch who has to escape her fate, escape her trials. It's beautifully written. I do enjoy it. I'll be honest, I don't remember a lot about it, but I do remember that I liked it. Someone gifted me a copy of The Witches of Eastwick in Romanian, Vrăjitoarele din Eastwick. I haven't read it yet, but the movie was interesting, so that could be something. And then there's The Witch of Portobello by Paulo Coelho. I took off the cover because I didn't like it, I don't think. Paulo Coelho's style of writing is not my favorite, but I do find his books to be really insightful and really spiritually, metaphysically rich. So I read it for that reason. I did enjoy the character of the Witch of Portobello. I thought she was psychologically kind of fascinating. So if you're looking for something that's not like super atmospheric witch vibes this fall, that does have some witchcraft and some spirituality, check it out. Canoli, what are you doing? Also, I put this aside to talk about it and then I completely forgot to bring it up. I'm currently reading The Lighthouse Witches by C.J. Cook, and I love it. I don't believe that there is such a thing as like objective reviews, so I don't really like when people split things up into subjective review and objective review. But I would say, in terms of the writing, I can definitely tell there are some things that could be improved about it. It does a lot of telling rather than showing. There are too many storylines, like too many folkloric elements that I think it's trying to cram in there, too many different timelines. However, subjectively, I find this to be a 5-star read because it's so incredibly atmospheric and vivid, really plants you on this remote Scottish island with a spooky lighthouse. So I love this so far, and I would strongly recommend you to read it as well. And then I don't have this with me currently, but also one that I enjoyed is Hour of the Witch by Chris Bohajalian. Sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. This is historical fiction. It doesn't actually have witchcraft in it, but it takes place during the Massachusetts witch trials. So if you are looking for something to take you back to kind of like a Salem witch trials ambiance, all about, women trying to survive in a world that's determined to keep them down, then this one was also really well written. I also forgot to mention The Great Witch of Brittany by Louise Morgan, I believe is the name. This one is about the life and death of a witch in Brittany who is Romani, the subsequent generations and everything that she goes through. It's more of like taking us through her life. So I would say it was not super enthralling. It actually took me about 1.5 years to read, which is crazy. I never stop in the middle of a book and then pick it back up that much later. So it wasn't very titillating, but it was, a nice, cozy, simple, easy read that does include witches. And next on my bookshelf, we have kind of like a random assortment of Gothic and fantastical books. The Haunting of Bryn Wilder by Wendy Webb I bought because I really like her Gothic suspense books, but I haven't read it yet. It seems like her books kind of follow a similar formula every time, but I do like the way she writes, so this is also very close up next on my TBR. Bluebeard's Castle by Anna Biller. I've been avoiding talking about this because I had such high hopes for it, partly because I love the cover, partly because I love Anna Biller's movie, The Love Witch. This was just not it for me. I thought that it was going to be like Gothic historical fiction, and it turned out to be just a modern day story about abuse. It didn't have a satisfying ending. I didn't feel like it was very well written, so I was really disappointed by this one, to tell you the truth. But if you're looking for something a little bit more like easy to read, fast-paced, kind of like a beach read for this late summer time, you might like it. I just think it's marketed wrong because it doesn't feel like a Gothic retelling of Bluebeard's Castle. It feels like just a modern day beach read. Cybele's Secret by Juliette Marie is, I think, YA. I think I read this one when I was a teenager, and it has a lot of folklore that it incorporates. Some Turkish, some vampires, magical forests. From what I recall, it was trying to do a lot, but I really did enjoy this one. Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia has to do with Mexican mythology, partially takes place in this land of gods. It was well written, but I found protagonists to be a little bit annoying, a little bit juvenile, and I wasn't really invested in what happened to her because of that. But if you're looking to read about some folklore that's not typically represented in fiction, then you might really enjoy this. In the Nightwood by Dale Bailey might be the best Gothic book that I've read all year. Really small, as you can see, and so jam-packed with beautiful literary prose. In terms of plot, it's like nothing that original or different, but I just adored the way that it was written. Cannot recommend this enough. I've never had to look up this many words before. There were so many literary words that I'm like, how does a person learn all these? Because I want to do that too. One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig is the first book in a series. It takes place in a fantastical world, kind of like a gothic, dark, moody setting. I did find the magical system to be thematically interesting. I just had trouble visualizing this. I like to be able to visualize the setting when I'm reading something, and I'm gonna be honest, I didn't get the hype at all. I didn't. Then there is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This one was honestly very crucial to my development as a writer. It takes place in an old mansion in Mexico, like a foggy hill in Mexico, not how you would imagine Mexico to be, like a hot desert. And it has to do with Jungian symbolism, the collective unconscious, racism. Beautifully written. But again, there's something about Silvia Moreno Garcia's protagonists that just feels a little bit juvenile to me. But clearly, it didn't stop me from enjoying the book. I don't know how to pronounce this, I'm just gonna be real. Beautifully written retelling of the goddess Circe. I don't know. Obviously, this one was like a really big bestseller, and I think a lot of that is because of how beautifully it's written. Her Little Flowers by Shannon Morgan is a gothic horror, has like a haunted house, a garden with secrets, a little bit of witchcraft in there. Does it? Maybe it doesn't have witchcraft. I don't really remember. I have one quip with this book and its writing that really made me struggle to enjoy it, and that was that there were just too many things happening at once in every single sentence, to the point where I found it very difficult to visualize what was happening. And also I found the dialogue to be a little bit theatrical and like overdone in some parts. But I get what it's trying to do, and if you're looking for something with ghosts, that's horror, and that has a magical garden, then you might enjoy this one. Now, something that I think did a better job at really planting you into a magical garden was Nightfall in the Garden of Deep Time by Tracy Higley. This deals a lot with like what it means to be an artist, what it means to have your work critiqued, what it means to put out an imperfect piece of work, all while having a magical garden that kind of feels like Midnight in Paris a little bit. I would say it was kind of like a mix between Midnight in Paris and The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. Another one that kind of featured a garden is The Awakenings by Sarah Maine. This is the third book of Sarah Maine's that I've read, and honestly, it will probably be the last because this one was a little bit disappointing to me. It was Gothic, it had, two POVs. It had all the elements of something that I would really like, specifically the stone tape theory. However, I just couldn't get into it. There was something about the prose that I really struggled to understand what was happening, and I just couldn't concentrate on it. I was never able to put my finger on what it was. And then also up close on my TBR is Slewfoot by Brom. I've heard wonderful things about this. I've heard that this is like a spooky, folkloric, awesome Halloween read, so I'm really looking forward to this one. I have no idea what I'm in store for, but I'm really excited. I have some more books that are my kind of like thrillers, detective, that could be good for this time of year, but I'm not going to go into in this video because I think this video is long enough. I also have some Jungian books that I think are awesome to read this time of year, and some books about the tradition of witchcraft and folkloric witchcraft that I love to read this time of year, but again, I'm just gonna leave it at fiction for now. Give me your best spooky recommendations to read this fall in the comments below, please, and I'll check them out. I hope that this video gave you some inspiration for what to read, and I'll see you soon.